Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I really mistitled this broadcast when I sent out the invitation because I talked about it being a book review of Meeting the Shadow, a book of a compilation of authors and essays on Carl Jung's idea of the shadow. And the subtitle is The Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature. And rather than review, because this there's a few reasons why it's not going to be a review. Number one, I haven't read the whole book in 20 years. Um, I read it many years ago, and it was life changing for me, and I didn't reread it for this broadcast. And number two, it would take hours to go over the various essays and ideas in here. So, really, this is more of an introduction to the shadow based on the book. And so, if you're interested, if this sounds like work that might intrigue you or might be helpful for you, then you can read this book by Jungian Abrams. And it's not a book that you have to go through from front to back. It's one that you can pick and choose from. There's a couple of them that I often would use independently with clients to give them out in the wilderness and have them read it and talk about it. I think it's a wonderful topic and idea when somebody sees the issue. I'm going to start over again, actually. Somebody's saying they can't hear me. Can the rest of you hear me? I just need a confirmation that you all can hear me, and then I'm going to start over again. Yes, people can hear me, so it sounds like it might just be on your end, but I'm going to have to start that whole thing over again. So now you see behind the curtain. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. It is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. Tonight's webinar, I think when I initially named it and sent out the invitation, I think I misnamed it. I talked about it being a review of the book by Jungian Abrams, which is a compilation of essays by various authors on Carl Jung's idea of the shadow. And there's a couple of reasons why it's not really that. It's more of an introduction to the shadow, kind of based on some of those readings. Number one, I haven't read this book in 20 years. I read it many years ago, and it absolutely changed my life. And so I did not reread the book for this. Number two, to go over the various essays, it would be many hours long broadcast, right? Each of the essays themselves are very rich and diverse. We would often use a lot of these essays independently with our clients to have them read and go over to understand various parts of themselves. I think it's a very shadow work or understanding the shadow, and I'm going to get into that. I think it's very good for people who think that the goal of therapy is to be good, right? That the goal of therapy is to behave and to behave well. I think it's very good for people who focus on symptom reduction. And Jung talks about this idea of going much deeper into the unconscious. So I'm going to talk about the shadow. I'm going to explain it, teach Jung's idea of it. I'll use some of the quotes out of the book. And if you're interested in the book, you can flip through it. You don't have to go through it in a linear way. You can kind of pick and choose. And I'll talk about how it applies to your children, to you and to your children. I love this quote. This is actually from Connie Zweig, who wrote another book about the shadow. And this is a quote from her book there, where she says, "I began to believe that the way I led my life was the source of my pain." I think when we have struggling children or loved ones who are in distress, spouses, whomever it might be, I think it's very easy to get confused and to assume that the source of our anxiety, the source of our distress in life is them. And what Jungian psychology talks about and teaches, along with many other philosophies and approaches, is that the problem is us and our relationship to it, right? How we perceive it. And hanging our hat on, for example, a child who's an identified patient is very convenient for us because then the problem becomes outside of us, right? And we all know what that leads to. That leads to an instinct, an impulse to try to fix things outside of us so that inner sense of turmoil is soothed. Of course, on the other end of that equation, it's a very miserable process to be turned into the project. And sometimes it happens so subtly. Sometimes it happens when we're falling in love, right? We find a spouse that we can soothe and manage, and that gives us a sense of well-being, and we call that falling in love. So what I talk about all the time and what this book does so well to unearth for us is that it is our selves, our own self and our relationship with life that becomes the problem. She says further in the same passage, she says, as my emotional turmoil subsided, I grew less engaged politically with the enemy out there and more engaged with the battleground within. Right? This is the shift. This is hopefully the shift that the parents who do this work, those who are listening to the podcast and reading my book, those who are engaged in therapy and 12-step meetings, those who are doing their own work, this is the shift, right? It's not that we become passive in our activism, but we realize that the real battle that's going on is inside of us. And some kind of awareness, observation, mastery, making peace with that changes our relationship to everybody else. This is a quote from Carl Jung, who coined the term shadow to describe that part of ourself that is unconscious, where we store parts that those in our lives, in our culture, in our family find acceptable. We shove those parts into that dark place. This came out of a dream that he had. He said, when I woke, I realized that the figure was my own shadow swirling in the mist. He saw this dark shadow behind him, brought into being by the little light I was carrying. There's some typos in this, I'm sorry. I needed to get this little light that was my consciousness, the only light that I have. Though infinitely small and fragile in comparison to the powers of darkness, it still is a light, my only light. I'm sorry that I completely butchered that quote. But basically, he talked about the light that we see, kind of the only light that we have, our light, is the thing that creates the shadow, right? The things that we have in our conscious mind, the things that we allow to stay integrated as part of us. That's the light, that's the ego. That's what creates the shadow. It's everything in the shade. Everything that is found to be unacceptable. A famous quote by Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. I want to be as clear and emphatic about this as possible, especially if you're watching or listening to this in light of your children, in light of their problems. That there is great power and wisdom and creativity in the shadow. The symptoms, right? The acting out, the manifestations of this darkness, while they might be terrifying, scary, dangerous, all those things can be true. If we can develop the ears, the hearing, to listen to what it's trying to tell us, we get access to all those treasures I just discussed. And what gets confusing, I think, for a lot of parents is this idea that their children the shadow takes over them, right? They become embodied, the embodiment of their own darkness. And what's counterintuitive is it's because they haven't spent some time understanding what's lost, understanding what's hurt, understanding what they were told to be afraid of. So shadow work is about integration. Shadow work is about confronting what scares us. I talk about this idea in dream work, for example. It's not a very uncommon idea, very, very common. If we can learn in our dreams, and sometimes in my experience, this comes out of our work while we're awake, if we can learn to turn to the thing that scares us, to the scary wolf, right? Or the monster, or just the dark and shady figure. if we can turn to it and look to it and ask it what it wants to tell us, it can often offer us great wisdom. Because the things in our dreams can't kill us. It's just a dream. The things that are in our dreams that we're afraid of are the things that we've been told to be afraid of. That we've been told that if we don't pay attention from them or run from them or try to destroy them, that they will destroy us. And it's simply not true. Enlightenment is a process of integrating all parts of ourselves, right? Understanding our deepest angers, fears, lusts, right? Making friends with all of those parts of ourselves instead of shoving them in a closet and not understanding that in the closet they become mutations of themselves. These are what the stories are about in our myths and our movies. This is what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was about, which is referenced throughout this book of essays. Like I said, the ego is the light and the shadow is the shade. In the shadow is lust, greed, suicidal and murderous tendencies, right? And like I've talked about, even with, one of the reasons why we have them write an impact letter to you, and I said this to somebody just today. I said, if you're going to write an impact letter, don't worry about how good it is. In fact, it can be blaming, attacking, vilifying, exaggerated. For now, you don't even have to share it. And then let's look at it and then let's find the truth that's hiding in it. But because in many families, confronting mother or father or brother or sister was we were told that it was self-indulgent. We were told that it was blaming, that it was making excuses, not being accountable and responsible, right? We were told all those things, which were really a defense against our own inadequacies, our own insecurities. So the child internalizes that sensibility, right? Many students resist the impact letter. It's one of the most resisted assignments at a vote, the impact letter. For years, I couldn't even get our therapists to do it because our therapists were so trained by their own family of origin to not practice this exercise of going back and looking. Right? I talk about this in my new book. I talk about we don't go back to look for excuses or for self-indulgence. We go back to understand. And by understanding, there comes a grace and a freedom. Like I said, shadow work, or the idea, the concept of the shadow, comes from Carl Jung, Jungian psychology. We can learn about the collective shadow. That is a shadow that we all share, right? There are certain archetypes in our movies, monsters in our stories that represent certain aspects of ourselves that we all have. There's a personal shadow, which is something that's just unique to me. There's a family shadow, which is rules in my family, like don't be angry, or sex is bad, right? Or don't be vulnerable, or whatever it is. So we have shadows in various levels. Art therapy can be a way of exposing it, right? Not a verbal process, but looking at symbols and what we draw. Sand tray therapy, for example, when you play with toys, with children's toys, can be a way of unearthing the shadow. One of the reasons I was so bad at play therapy with young children when I first started as a therapist is because I was in my head only aware of things that were most conscious. And I didn't realize that these children needed to tell their abuse stories through their play. I kept trying to fix it. Carl Jung proposed that art can be used to alleviate or contain feelings of trauma, fear, or anxiety, and also to repair, restore, and heal. The vehicle of the shadow is repression, right? It is to suppress and repress those parts of ourselves that we are told are unacceptable. And in fact, furthermore, like I said, we are told to be afraid of them because we are told if we don't get rid of them, they're going to destroy our lives. We're told them by our parents initially, our peers and our siblings later on, society, teachers. They have their chance at it later on. We split off. That's another phrase from Jungian psychology. We split off those parts of ourselves. For those of you that are listening to this or watching this, this is really the work of therapy in many ways. While other people might have a different name or different language for it, it's really just becoming whole, who you are. And to do that, we have to battle shame and fear and those messages that told us that we had to repress these parts of ourselves. And we have the same fears that we were taught to have, which is it will destroy us if we don't hate it, if we don't confront it, if we don't constantly, vigilantly keep it at bay. We learn to recognize it. I talk about this with the students all the time. I talk about this with adult clients. Before you get rid of it, whatever it is, let's spend some time observing it, watching it, understanding it. It's hard for all of us because of shame. It's hard for your children because they think they're in trouble. Right? That's the only morality. That's the only way they can make sense of it, is getting in trouble. It's a primitive way of thinking about it. So when a child is throwing a tantrum, is lashing out, we try to create as much safety, of course, for everybody in the group. But we also try to spend some time and say, it's important to understand the work that's going on for you. Like what's this serving? The purposes of destructive behaviors assignment is that assignment. The war story is shadow work. Tell me about a time, something that you would have gotten in trouble for, maybe even a reason that you're here, and tell me about it like you're bragging about it. Tell me about it like you're trying to sell yourself to me that I would want to hang out with you on a Saturday night as a teenager. And that kind of leaning into it work is a way of integrating and understanding it and listening to it and learning about ourselves. We create balance and harmony, right? We stop raging the war inside of us. The shadow work was in contrast to Freud, because Freud talked about the drives that we had to manage. And he talked about, it was a very individual process, right? It was all about each individual. And Jung talked about this collective idea, these archetypes and these themes that were present with everybody in our culture, in all time, not just our current culture. How do we meet the shadow? It's in our exaggerated feelings about others, right? When we have strong reactions to others, that can be parts of our shadow that we've split off from ourselves and we see in others. And negative feedback that we get from others who serve as mirrors, right? So sometimes listening to what people have to say about you can tell you a little bit about yourself that you're not aware of. Those interactions in which we continually have the same troubling effect on several different people. If you get told you have a tail over and over again, you might want to look and see what's poking out your pants in the back there. In our impulsive and inadvertent acts, the things that when people say to me, and this happens all the time in the field, all the time with my clients, they'll say, I wasn't myself, right? Something came over me. That's what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is about. It's about that part of us that gets activated where we become something other. And people who continue with that mindset, like it's not me, haven't understood that it absolutely is you. And if you can find a way to sit with it, to understand it, to integrate it, you won't need to become that monster to take care of yourself, because the monster shows up to take care of you, to take care of something, to speak some truth. In situations in which we are humiliated, where our shame is, right? That's our shadow. Those things that we are told that we shouldn't be. In our exaggerated anger about another person's faults. So even if your criticisms of them land, if they're true, our intense reaction to it tells us about our shadow. Tells us about the parts of ourselves that we were taught were unacceptable. This is a clear statement. The aim of meeting the shadow is to develop an ongoing relationship with it, to expand our sense of self by balancing the one-sidedness of a conscious attitude with our unconscious depths. A right relationship with the shadow offers us a great gift to lead us back to our buried potentials. Through shadow work, a term we coined to refer to the continuing effort to develop a creative relationship with the shadow, we can, number one, achieve a more genuine self-acceptance based on a more complete knowledge of who we are. Number two, diffuse the negative emotions that erupt unexpectedly in our daily lives. Number three, feel more free of the guilt and shame associated with our negative feelings and actions. Number four, recognize the projections that color our opinions of others. Five, heal our relationship through more honest self-examination and direct communication. And last, use the creative imagination via dreams, drawing, writing, and rituals to the song of self. Right? There is to produce great art, one has to let go of fear. There's a clear relationship. To find creative solutions, one has to let go of fear. To parent more effectively, one has to let go of fear. By let go of fear, I'm not saying don't feel it. I mean sort it out. Manage it. Take care of it. Attend to it. Because if you show up afraid, you lose creativity. Neuroscience tells us that, right? You are reduced to a primal drive, which is a fight or flight or freeze drive, and creative solutions are gone. We recognize the shadow, like I said, in our humor. Much of our humor, the things that we laugh at, are shadow elements. In stories that we tell that we're drawn to, in our dreams, our fantasies, and our myths, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a wonderful illustration of shadow work. We see shadow in our excesses, our addictions and our perversions, and our projections, our reactiveness to situations. In Al-Anon, they say if it's hysterical, it's historical. Right? That's in essence saying if you're having a big reaction to something, it's not nothing. And the answer is not to overreact, but the answer is to follow it, to see where it came from. Whenever I'm doing therapy, I'm constantly asking the question, do you know where that came from? And we definitely have our usual suspects, right? But where in your background were you told to feel bad about who you are? Because fear, shame, and guilt, they're the problem, not the solution. And we were told that they were the solution. It's incredible, isn't it? We were told that our guilt, our shame, which is just hateward turned inward, and that our fear was the solution to our problems. It's why it took me so long as a client in therapy to understand that my therapist wasn't there to kick my butt and to confront me. It took me years to understand what happened when she just spent time understanding me, providing a safe place for me, and how that healed. It takes sometimes clients I work with many years to give up on the idea that guilt and shame and fear are the saviors of their mental health. When the shadow takes over, this is when it becomes so repressed, right? That it takes over us. They can become compulsions, addictions, identifications, exaggerated behaviors, impulsiveness, dark dramatic dress, dark music, right? Identification with evil, things that we perceive as evil symbols, angry groups, rap music, satanic lyrics and literature and symbols, all that kind of stuff. Goth, when I was a kid. It's taken on several different names over the years, but when I was a kid, it was called goth. Dark, black. Vehement denials, right? The old Shakespearean idea, quote, methinks thou doth protest too much, right? Our defensiveness to something shows us our shadow. That's why when somebody tells us something about us, the more comfortable we are with ourselves, the less we are reactive to that accusation. In fact, even if it's just a little bit true, we embrace it. We say, I absolutely know. I know I'm an idiot. And then there's no fight anymore. And then you just get to be you. And then you just get to have boundaries. In our media, our art, and our heroes, we learn about it. Exaggerated feelings are things like, I can't believe he would do that. Negative feedback from others, like, this is the third time you arrived late without calling me. Impulsive or inadvertent acts is like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Humiliation, I'm so ashamed about how he treats me, or exaggerated anger about others' faults, like, boy, he really let his weight get out of control. The shadow is honest. It just disguises things so that we don't recognize them. That's what happens in our dreams, right? Our dreams are Freud called our dreams the royal road to the unconscious because they always tell the truth. They are our own personal myth, and they tell the truth about what's going on in our lives. But they're disguised so that we can't recognize them until we do our work. And then it becomes easier and easier to see our dilemmas because we see them when we're awake. So dream interpretation isn't even a mystery. It becomes fairly simple. The shadow has lots of energy. It's powerful. I think I've shared before that when a client says to me, I know I shouldn't say this, but I know something rich and powerful is about to come. Something wise. Something that if we explore and look at and sit with, we'll have something powerful to tell us about that person and their dilemma with living. When it becomes hidden, those things that we it's the old child's phrase, idea is that our imaginary friends become the monsters under the bed, in the closet. When they become hidden, those parts of ourself that we are told that are unacceptable becomes hidden. It becomes mutated, perverted, and invisibly influential and takes over. I talked to a rock star one time about their tremendous success. I was doing an interview one time. And I noticed that this particular person was kind, gentle, loving, Buddhist almost like in his way that he lived his life. And I said to him, your band has a lot of satanic symbols. Tell me what that's about. Why? I know you don't worship the devil, so why do you have these things? He said, we just wanted to pick something that would piss the parents off. That's all we cared about as kids. So we picked the symbol of what they thought was evil and we just celebrated it as a way to express our anger at our parents and authority. And so when you listen to your children's music, it can be off-putting and offensive for sure. If you can, you don't have to. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, but if you can, listen to what it's trying to say. I talk about that when we were little, when I was little, I liked Tyrannosaurus Rex. That was my dinosaur, right? Most kids love Tyrannosaurus Rex or Velociraptor, right? Why do they love that? They love it because it's one of the most powerful predators that ever lived on Earth. And I used to say to my boys in the wilderness, Tyrannosaurus Rex turned into a handgun in a rap song. It's the same expression, right? It's the same search for something that you can identify with that is powerful and in a world where you feel powerless and small and insignificant and scared. So again, things start to change meaning when we see them through the lens of Jung's idea of the shadow. Carl Jung said, we all have a shadow, or does the shadow have us? He turned this question into a riddle when he asked, How do you find a lion that has swallowed you, right? If you have become the embodiment of the shadow in these exaggerated ways that I've alluded to or described, it's hard to see it. It's hard to see your children by the time they get here. I mean, that's part of why this program works and is necessary for the children, because it's taken over. There's no way out of it except for to remove them out of the context and keep them safe, and to start to incorporate the part, to start to listen to them, to start to give them a voice about their hurt, their insecurity, their powerlessness, their fear, their sadness, their shame. And once we start to unpack all of that, the symptoms aren't necessary anymore. This is from the one of the blogs, or excuse me, one of the articles in the book. Robert Bly wrote this. He said, since the can, he kind of referred to a can or a bag as kind of a symbol for a shadow. Since the can or bag is closed and its images remain in the dark, we can only see the contents of our own bag by throwing them innocently, as we say, out into the world. Spiders then become evil, snakes cunning, goats oversexed, men become linear, women become weak. And he says, and the Chinese all look alike. We turn. Oh, this is all dictated. So that's why there's so many spelling errors. He said the Russians become weak, is what he said, and the Chinese all look alike. We turn people, cultures into monsters, right? There's the bad guy out there. Black people do this. Chinese people look like this. Germans are like this, right? We project out onto the world our own sense of inadequacy onto other people. There's no spelling errors on this one. I want to tell the story because it's in my book, and it's an example of how a shadow showed up many, many years ago when I was listening to somebody in a Sunday school class, talk about something. And this was in the context of his struggling, addicted son. And he thought he was saying something else. But of course, hearing it through my ears, I heard something different. So the gentleman teaching the lesson, it goes like this. In church some years ago, a father teaching a Sunday school lesson told us about a dream he'd had and the days leading up to his lesson. His young adult son had fallen into worldliness and was struggling with addictions. In my dream, he explained, my son and I came to the edge of a filthy, dirty pond polluted with all kinds of garbage. I knew the water was toxic, but my son did not. Before I could stop him, he was swimming out into the center of the poisoned pond. I gasped in horror as he struggled and started to sink. I was filled with pain and torment as he disappeared from sight. I couldn't save him, for if I dove into the water after him, I would also die. He told this story in the backdrop of his context. He thought the dream explained how his son was trapped and destroyed by the sins of the world. He talked about the dirty pond with disdain and dread. In one way of thinking, he was accurate in his interpretation. However, as a therapist working with young men in similar conditions, with the similar conditions as his young adult son, I thought of it in a different sense. His son was swimming into the father's rejected unconscious. Children do this. They signal to us that something isn't working. Their symptoms are the sirens letting us know that something about the context we have created for them is broken. Something powerful pulled his son into it, and he was now in the grips of life-threatening addictions. His father had to overcome his fear and rage to save his son. In a sense, the father and son will die. As the father dives into the work of confronting the unconscious aspects of himself, a new self can emerge. His son needs him to take this risk. The father must confront his fears, going after the boy, for both to have a chance at emerging as more complete and whole selves. I have seen many brave parents do this for their children over the years, and the transformation for all of them is nothing short of magnificent. So again, what we think is the monster is not necessarily the monster. What we think is as the toxicity of the worldliness that our children have fallen into, it can be transformed into something quite different when we understand it. And if we do our work, and I'm looking at the list of people in attendance tonight, and I know some of them, And I don't know some of you, but some of you I know have done your work, and you know exactly what this second part of the story is talking about. You know it exactly. And it is absolutely life-giving and freeing. And it doesn't come with guilt or shame or blame. In fact, it comes with the absence of those. For different people in different families and cultures, what falls into ego and what falls into shadow can vary. For instance, some permit anger or aggression to be expressed, some do not. Some permit sexuality, vulnerability, or strong emotions, many do not. Some permit financial ambition or artistic expression or intellectual development, but some do not. All the feelings, capacities that are rejected, or that's all the feelings, capacities that are rejected by the ego or exiled into the shadow and contribute to the hidden power of the dark side of human nature. In other words, we all have a different shadow. And our teachers warn us not to romanticize other cultures. Sometimes primitive cultures are very romanticized and glorified. But in tribal communities, their bag can be just as large, maybe even larger than in more modern cultures. It's common in tribal cultures, for example, where everybody knows the same thing and nobody knows anything different, right? They don't know individuation. Carl Jung is famous for saying, I would rather be whole than good, and that the work is to embrace the shadow. I talk about this idea of keeping your friends close and your enemies even closer, right? This is the work of shadow work. Those things that are hurting us, pay attention to them, listen to them, lean into them. If we just try to get rid of them through symptom reduction, they're going to pop up somewhere else in the garden. I talked about the war stories. I have an assignment called, it actually came from, I wrote about this in my first book. And for those of you watching, you can see there's an image on the screen. This was a piece of art created by my therapist, and it used to sit on the wall behind her for years. And it has these list of words, and it's artistically done. It has these list of words, and I won't read all of them, but it looks like it's on a tablet. And it says drop out, fail, quit, lose, relax, give in, flunk, let go, empty, surrender, wait, give over, mellow out, slow down. Don't, forget, submit, fade away, relinquish, withdraw, flop, yield, back out, acquiesce, sink, capitulate, and flag, and goes on and on and on. All of these words that we associate with failure. But the title that you can barely make out in this piece of art is called Words of Higher Enlightenment. And it took me a while to figure out the point. The point is that people who embrace aspects of themselves and make peace with it are enlightened. And that goodness, right, being good, like Jung talked about, is the enemy of being whole, of being who you are. Children start to experiment with the self, and sometimes it takes over, right? And part of what happens in their brain is they're trying to quiet the crowd in their brain of people telling them what they should and should do, and so they rebel against it, which my therapist always talks about how rebellion is a last resort. We become less directive in our therapy while still holding really clear boundaries. It's one of the ways that we do this. It's good for people who are therapy savvy. It's good for people who prefer to fake good or do the right thing. We become less directive. I would give them the words of higher enlightenment, and I'd say, I want you to write, I wouldn't give any other explanation, but I'd give them that piece of art that I just read from, and I'd say, write me a one-page essay based on this. And I just wanted to hear what they thought about those words. And then often I would point out to them, could you tell, it's hard to tell, what the title of this piece of art is? And then we would talk about it. 7 challenges were a list of steps or ideas brought into the addiction field, where you're encouraged to stop trying to convince the addict that he or she is an addict. You're just trying to have a conversation. You're getting out of the battle with the client. It's the same lesson as the book Motivational Interviewing, right? It's what I talk about all the time when I say honor the resistance, listen to the resistance, honor the defense, give it the honor that it deserves, because the defense is doing important work. It's protecting against something that the child feels threatened about or by. On the temple of Apollo at Delphi, it has the phrase, know thyself. This is the work, to know yourself. This is their work and your work. And by knowing yourself better, you'll understand them more. We do that through, we become more honest and assertive in this work. Our students do it through honesty with each other, through confession, right? I had therapy session today and I confessed to my therapist something I did stupid, idiotic today. I called it confession. She immediately forgave me. We do peer feedback, like I said, that's part of accessing the shadow. Letter writing, contemplation, meditation, mindfulness, journal writing. We help our clients understand the function of the symptoms. We validate the need that the symptom serves. That's what that means, to honor the symptom or the defense. And we talk about learning to care for the self in ways that don't create more problems. And we also give voice to the voiceless, right? That's part of the communication, the work with you all. Sometimes we take away the curriculum because clients and students get into this box checking mode where they think that that's the goal. And like I said, we become less directive sometimes. What's worked for the parent? Don't look for the right answers. Like I talk about, you don't get to be right anymore. You get to be a self. You don't get to be good anymore. You get to be a self. And that's so much better. Learn to be quieter. Learn to speak your truth. I remember I had one student years ago where his father on a parent phone call was kind of stuttering his way through it, and the student could tell. And he said, Dad, you can tell me the truth. I know you have good reason not to trust that I can handle it, but you can tell me the truth, and your lack of assertiveness with me feels manipulative and controlling. And of course, the dad would have never labeled it that, but it was. We try to reinforce honesty over compliance, and we become very slow to judge. I think I've told the story before. My son, years ago, before Banksy was nearly as popular as he is today, my son is 27, and this was probably his sophomore year of high school. He wrote a biography in his art class. My son's a great artist. In fact, graffiti art is one of his specialties. Does huge murals for people. Banksy, the enigmatic graffiti artist, my son did an essay on Banksy in his English class. It wasn't an art class, it was an English class. And the teacher completely rejected it. Gave him a C+ and talked about how it wasn't art. In fact, my son's private art teacher told my son to not include graffiti art in his art portfolio when he was applying to art schools. My son, luckily, didn't listen to his art teacher, showed his art, his graffiti art in his art portfolio to the art school, and he got into one of the most prestigious art schools in the country, the Art Institute of Chicago, and they said in part because of his graffiti art. But going back to Banksy, he wrote this essay or this paper on Banksy, got a low grade, was disappointed. Later on in the semester, the teacher went up to Park City to the Sundance Festival, and Banksy was there. Nobody knows what Banksy looks like. Well, someone does, but the public doesn't know. And Banksy was there because he left some murals on some walls, left some paintings on some walls, and there was a film there based on Banksy. I think it was called something like In Through the Exit Door, or the Gift Shop, Exit Through the Gift Shop, I think. So there was a movie about Banksy. Banksy showed up in Park City, left some things on some walls, and my son's teacher got enthralled by it, the story and the art and the creativity. And she came back and gave my son an A. on his paper. Reverse the grade. She didn't have the depth. She didn't have the breadth to be able to see. She had to wait for somebody at a film festival in Park City, Utah to teach her, which is okay because that's we all learn. But it just shows how sometimes we just don't know. In therapy, when doing shadow work, as Carl Jung did it, psychotherapy offers a ritual for the renewal in which the shadow personality can be brought into awareness and assimilated, thus reducing its inhibiting and destructive potentials and releasing trapped positive life energy. I have a series of quotes here. Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. These are all from Jung or Jungian psychology. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of a parent. Right? The unowned aspects of ourselves, the unrealized aspects of ourselves are some of the greatest burdens for our children to carry, and they will carry them. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. I love this quote from Jung. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others. For me, that's the way that I know my clients the best. Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. The word happiness would lose its meaning if not balanced by sadness. There's no coming to consciousness without pain. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. This is similar. I hadn't read this quote in a long time, and I put it in my book, my new book, I talked about how when people tell me they had a good childhood, I tell them therapy can fix that. Maybe this is where I drew upon this from my own unconscious, from Carl Jung, who said, "Show me a sane man and I will cure him for you." So what are some take home? Value the journey over the destination and never arrive completed. Never fix it completely. Because if you fix it completely, you cease to live. Value struggles and mistakes as much as you do successes. I spend so much time with parents saying, if we could learn to value the mistakes, learn to teach our children to value the mistakes as much as we value the successes, we could help them become more whole. Value wholeness and honesty over compliance and obedience. And do your own work is almost always the answer when we are upset or wondering how to respond to our children. Sorry for so many typos for those of you looking. I dictated a lot of these because I was in a hurry preparing for the slides, so I apologize for that. I'm going to go through upcoming events, and then we'll get back to any questions if you have them. We will be in Portland, Oregon this March 6th. In Southern California, April 5th, Los Angeles area, and then New York City, we're planning on an April date. For information in all of these parent support groups, contact keisha@evoketherapy.com. This is a new thing that I'm going to announce tonight too. We're going to have online Zoom wilderness therapy parent meetings that I will host. And we're going to also have intensive meetings that I will host. So it will be live video chat where everybody's picture, only a maximum of 12 people, including me, will be on live video chat. You'll have to register ahead of time. You'll be informed that your confidentiality, you'll be exposed because people will see you. We'll only accept people that will join us with live video. And it'll be a combination of sharing and discussion. Since we can't travel all over the country all the time, this is for people who live in remote areas or areas that we don't visit as often, but it can also be for anybody. So that announcement coming soon, coming in March and April. The next parent workshop is this weekend. You can check with Keisha, Kaysha, at evoketherapy.com for an upcoming parent workshop. The next one will be in the 1st of May. We try to do them about every 6 weeks or so. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, come to one of our intensives. That is shadow work. That is learning to visit the discarded, split off parts of yourself. Sometimes we talk about it in the context of inner child work. The next opening will be April 22nd. We have a few spots left. I'll also be in England on May 8th. That one will fill up in advance. And Finding You Too, we have another July date that we're going to be opening up next week because our first Finding You Too is already full. We're talking about doing a Finding You weekend in Los Angeles and New York. More to come on that soon. If you want to know about our intensives or our pursuits trips, which are outdoor adventure trips for families or young adults, contact our intensives program, our intensives part of our website, or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. We ask all parents to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adultchildren.org. Alateen is for teens. RefugeRecovery.org is a place where you can go, where you can find Buddhist-inspired recovery programs, less of a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app. On an iPhone or iOS device, use the podcast app. On an Android device, use the SoundCloud app, or go to computer. On your computer, go to soundcloud.com. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us at Evoke Therapy. Or you can find the Evokes Intensives on Instagram using @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. The Alumni Foundation, which raises money for people who can't afford therapy, can be found by going to Facebook and searching Evoke Therapy Programs. The Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week. My old book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, and the new book, The Audacity to Be You, is available on Amazon. And I'm doing this thing to promote the new book. If you buy the Kindle version and give a review, I will send a signed copy to you or to anybody you want me to send a signed copy to of the new book. So if you're interested in doing that, I'm trying to promote the book and also promote just getting the message out there. Somebody asked me why I wanted to promote the book so much. And as you know, I just want to get this message of healing out to more people. All right. Any questions before I wrap up tonight? This was a perfect broadcast for me tonight because I made so many mistakes. I have to lean into my horrible, rotten self tonight. One parent writes this: my child gave me a second chance to hear his story of darkness and failure around an event that happened a few years ago. Thanks to my work, I was able to hear it with so much more compassion for the pain he experienced and understanding of the strength he met these painful events than when it first happened. Thank you for teaching me how to see this in a new way. And I just want to tell you this, I want to tell you this, and I want everybody to hear this. The fact that you did enough work that he was willing to give you a second chance is to your credit. So you're welcome, and you deserve the credit for doing the work that he would give you a second chance to tell the story, because it sounds like the first time didn't go so well. So good job. All right, looks like that's all the questions for this evening. Thanks for joining me and my horrible, rotten self, flawed, spelling error self tonight. I appreciate it. I hope these points of contact are helpful, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.